Tim here, and today I'm going to teach you how to read music in one easy lesson. We're going to start out with the basics of reading and then move quickly to more advanced strategies, and then towards the end I'm going to give you some critical advice on how to practice reading music so that you can master it once and for all. You've probably seen this before, and this is what we call the staff. In fact, there's two of them. There's one on the top and then one here on the bottom. The top staff is usually played with the right hand, and usually you're playing from the middle of the piano up this direction. The bottom staff is usually played with the left hand, usually from this middle note, middle C, down into the lower direction. And it makes sense because the notes up on the higher staff are going to be up here, and the notes on the low staff are going to be down there. And when we put both staffs together, that is what we call the grand staff. Let's take a look and zoom in on one of these staffs to see what it's made of. So as you can see, we're on the top staff here, and we have this funny looking symbol. It looks like a G, and that is called the G clef, or more commonly, the treble clef. And you think about it, it makes sense, because I said that the notes you're going to be playing with the treble clef are up on the high end of the piano, and treble is higher pitches. So what do you think the opposite of the treble clef is going to be? This one right here. Well, if you said F clef, you're technically correct, but the more well-known name is the bass clef, and it makes sense since a lot of the notes you're going to be playing are down low in the bass. So taking a look at the treble clef, I've drawn a note here, and that note is on a line. Notice how there are 5 lines and 4 spaces in between those lines, and a note can fall either on a line or a space in between the lines, and depending on which line or space it falls on, tells you what note to play and where on the piano to play that note. And this note specifically is this F right here. I want to take a second to make sure you understand the layout of the piano, because if you don't, the rest of this video is going to be very confusing. So here we go. I always like to find the note C first. You find the group of 2 black keys, you go down and 1 into the left, and that is C. And the C right in the middle of the piano is middle C. After C in the alphabet is D, and it's between these groups of 2 black keys. It doesn't matter where on the piano it is. If it's between the group of 2 black keys, it's a D. If it's to the left of them, it's a C. And guess what? If it's to the right, it's an E, right? F is to the left of the group of 3 black keys. G is in between the bottom 2. A is between the top 2. And guess what? You only go from A to G in the alphabet, the music alphabet. So if this is C, you go C, D, E, F, G, and then it repeats A, B, C, D, E, F, G. When learning these for the first time, I always recommend students memorize the lines and spaces for each clef. And for each of these, I have a certain saying, and that is this. Bottom line is E for every. Next line up is G for good. Next line up, middle line is B for boys, so every good boy. D is for deserves. And the top line is F, of course, for fruit. So every good boy deserves fruit. Using that saying, you can figure out any of the notes on the treble clef if it happens on a line. What note would this be? Well, it would be G for good, right? Because it's every good. Just make sure that when you're using these sayings, you're going from the bottom line to the top line, because if you do it from top to bottom, you're going to get the notes all mixed up. Here, I've drawn all the lines on the treble clef, and I want to show you where on the piano that these notes occur, because it's very important. Remember I mentioned this was middle C, right? Now, this first E, the bottom line of the treble clef, that is actually right here. So you just skip a note up to E. The next line up, the second line up, G, is right here. The next line up is B, D, and the top line is F. Do you notice a pattern here? Well, you start from middle C, and you skip every other one, so you may have figured that out. But you start at middle C, and then these are the lines of the treble clef. E, G, B, D, F. And they happen right here on the piano. You may be wondering what this 4/4 is, this number here. We're not going to talk about that today. There's also the spaces of the treble clef, and they happen to spell face. the bottom space, which is F, is right here. So it's the first F above middle C. And then the next note A is right here. You got C here, and then E, finishing it out. So the spaces of the treble clef are F, A, C, E, spells bass. Okay, now we're taking a look just at the bottom line, that bass clef. And unfortunately for you, the lines and spaces of the bass clef are different from the treble clef. So let me explain. Okay, now the bottom line. We're going from the bottom to the top. The bottom line is G for good. And it's way down here. So here's middle C. It's not 1 G below middle C. It's 2 G's below middle C. And I'll explain why in a minute. But just know that the bottom line starts here. And so it's G for good, B for boys, D for deserves, F for fruit, and A for always. So it's kind of changing up the order here. Instead of every good boy deserves fruit, I like to do good boys deserve fruit always. Now, if the sayings being too similar is a problem for you, which some students it is, you can come up with a different saying for the left hand. I still remember one of my students one time said, "Great big dogs fight animals." And I'm like, wow, that's pretty gruesome for a 9-year-old, which is how old she was. But anyway, whatever saying you can come up with works, use that. Now you may be wondering, Tim, why was this G 2 G's below middle C? Well, I'll tell you why. It's this. This note I've drawn right here is middle C. That's where middle C is on the piano. And that is the middle of the piano. Remember, I said that bass clef goes from middle C really down this way. And you can tell, like, by the staff, there's a pretty big difference between middle C, or a pretty big distance between that middle C and that G. And so there's going to be a big distance on the piano as well, because that G is pretty far down compared to where middle C is. And actually each line goes up towards middle C. Spaces of the bass clef, which are my favorite, they're just so easy to remember. We're going to start at A. Remember G? This was the G we started on for the lines. Well, we're just starting one note above it, A. And you can probably guess what the notes are going to be. A, C, E, G. Because each time we skip over every other note, just starting on a different note. So all cows eat grass. That's the one I like. A for all. Wow, I can't talk today. C for cows, E for eat, and G for grass. Now you may have noticed the last G I hit was right here, and that's pretty close to middle C. And it actually tracks with the sheet music because middle C, remember, is right here, a little bit above the staff. So they're actually pretty close together, these two. And so that distance translates to the piano. If they're closer together on the sheet music, they're closer together on the piano. They're more further apart on the sheet music. They're further apart on the piano. So there's still plenty more to cover, but first I want to give you a quiz just to make sure you got everything before we move on. Question 1. Find all of the D's on the piano if you're sitting in front of them, or if you don't have the piano in front of you, in relation to the groupings of 2 black keys or 3 black keys, where is D in relation to those? If you can't get this right, I mentioned it pretty early on in the lesson. Question 2. What note is this, and where on the piano is it? I mentioned it earlier. Last question is, this bottom note is G, so where specifically on the piano is this G located? It's in the bass clef. So if you didn't understand these, you're going to have to go back and watch, but I'll tell you right now that D is right here on the piano between the groups of 2 black keys, and that this note right here, this is G, and it's not right here, it's down here. There's still a few basics to cover before we move into the more advanced stuff, and I'm talking specifically in how the treble clef and the bass clef relate to middle C. Okay, so here we have the grand staff again. Remember, that's when you have the treble clef and bass clef going on at the same time. Now, I have a question for you. We know where middle C is on the piano. It's right here. Where is middle C in the sheet music? I did, if you were paying attention, mentioned it for the bass clef. Not sure for the treble, so I'm going to show you both. Middle C for both treble clef and bass clef is right here. For treble clef, it's what we call a ledger line. That's when you add lines below the staff or above the staff to tell where you are. Right? So as I drag the note down, you have to add ledger lines. So for middle C in the treble clef, it's one ledger line below the staff. And for the bass clef, it's one ledger line above the staff. And if you think about it, it makes sense because C is the middle. And believe it or not, these are the same note, even though they have that distance between them. And the reason they have that distance between them, even if it makes it a little more confusing, is so that the notes don't run into each other. I can show you an example of that later. So anyway, it makes sense because, like I said, treble clef is playing for middle C. And then remember, these are the lines of the treble clef, E, G, B, D, F. So we're going up that direction. It makes sense for middle C to be on the bottom because we're moving up that way. Bass clef, it's the opposite. Middle C is at the top of the staff. And then the notes we figure out are way down here. And that's why G for the lines of the bass clef was way down here, because you go C, and then because we're going down, you're almost going in reverse order. So C, A, F, D, B, G. So it was C, and then it was the lines in reverse order. And that's how both clefs are joined at middle C. Now, one quick question you have probably is, Tim, can you go higher than middle C with the bass clef or lower than middle C with the treble clef? And the answer is yes. For instance, this note right here with the bass clef now, is F. And it's actually this F right here, kind of going into the treble clef territory. Now, 99% of the time when you have really high notes up on the bass clef, your treble clef notes will also be higher, unless you're doing some sort of finger cross things here. But just to let you know, it is entirely possible for one clef to go into the other. But most of the time, you're just sticking up here or down here for each of your hands, respectively. The next thing I'm going to tell you about is something that students, whenever I mention this, students always say, Tim, I wish I knew about this years ago. And this is the ledger line rules. So remember, the ledger lines are the lines you add above or below the staff to tell where you are. And it can be very tricky to tell what note you're on. And I'm going to give you a little shortcut to figure it out lightning fast. Okay, we're zooming in on treble clef here, but what I'm about to tell you applies to both clefs. These rules apply, but you got to be careful because the lines and spaces of treble clef or bass clef are different. So you'll have to act accordingly, and I'll teach you everything about it. So here's rule number one. Notice how over here we have a bunch of notes going high up off the staff. And these are all lines, right? Line, line, line. You can tell because there's a line going right through the notes. These are on spaces. So here is the ledger line rule. The lines going up off the staff, starting from the top line, are equal to the spaces on the staff. So what that means is that if this is F, A, C, and E, this is also F, A, C, and E. The only difference is that the bottom one here, because they're lower on the staff, keep in mind it's pretty close to middle C where we're starting, F, A, C, E. The spaces, right? And what I said was this is equal to the lines going up off the staff. So the top line of the treble clef is right here on the piano. And now you're going to do the same thing, just starting from that F. F, A, C, E. So I took all the other notes away. What note is this one? And here's how you figure it out. You go from the top line. There's F. You're going to skip one to A. Therefore, that note must be C. So you can use that as a little shortcut. Remember, the lines going up off the staff, starting from the top line, are equal to the spaces on the staff. Here, I've changed it. Now we're starting from the lines. These are the lines of the treble clef. E, G, B, D, F. And these are the spaces going up off the staff. And this is a very important part of it, starting from the top space. You don't want to start above the staff or it's not going to work. It's always starting from the top line or the top space. Or the bottom line or bottom spaces we'll see in a minute. So if this is E, G, B, D, F, guess what this is? It's E, G, B, D, F. It's just what I call, it's what we call up an octave. So when you play like a pattern and then you move it up to the next, from C up to the next C, we have moved things up an octave. So E, G, B, D, F, and then up an octave, E, G, B, D, F. Okay, now we have the same thing, but now we're in the bass clef. But the rule is the same. The lines of the bass clef, the lines of a clef, are equal to the spaces going up off the clef from where? Starting from the top space. So here's what that means. Lines of the bass clef are G, B, D, F, A. And the spaces of the bass clef, guess what? Are going to be G, B, D, F, A, except it is up a what? An octave, right? Now, when you're trying to find ledger lines that are way below the staff, it gets a little trickier, but the concept is the same. The lines of the staff are equal to the spaces going down below the staff, starting from the bottom space, by the way, this is very important, in reverse order. Notice how these notes go from the top note down, and that's the order in which they appear here too. So what you're going to do is the top, or I guess do this. The lines of the bass clef are G, B, D, F, A, right? So this right here is going to be the same thing, just in reverse order because we're going down. A, F, D, B, and that note way down here is that G. So you got to be careful because when you're going down below the staff, it's the same concept, but you're going from the top then to the bottom. Same thing with treble clef, except it applies to the lines and spaces of the treble clef. This is the perfect example to do next. The spaces of a staff, A, C, E, G, are equal to the lines going down below the staff, starting from the bottom line. So you're always starting from the staff and moving down, or starting from the staff and moving up. Very, very important. Very easy to get that wrong. But anyway, A, C, E, G. So you can surmise that the next notes we're looking for, going in reverse order actually. So we'll do A, C, E, G. And the reverse of that is G, E, C, A, except it's moved down an octave, right? Because we've moved quite far down on the staff. Next up, we have the best part of the whole lesson, which is where we start getting into the more advanced strategies. Once you master the basics, these strategies are going to help you really read music lightning fast, which is what you're going to need as a piano player, because you're going to have to be able to do this stuff and play at the same time and figure it out all on the fly. But first, before we get to those more advanced strategies, I just want to quickly say thank you to all those that have supported the channel over the years, from the regular viewers to the mods to channel members or people that sign up for courses over on my website, pianolessonsontheweb.com. We wouldn't have made it this far without you, and I just always want to take a minute to say thanks. Like I said, the next stuff up is the best part of the lesson, and then towards the end we have the practice strategies. But for now, here we go. Advanced strategy number 1, intervals. Here we have what? What is this called? It's called the grand staff. And the whole point of this next section is to teach you that you can read music a combination of 2 or 3 different ways. One is memorizing the lines and spaces on the staff, or going up off the staff if you're doing the ledger lines. You want to master that first, but once you master that, there's another thing you can add to give your brain more information to go on, and that will enable you to read music lightning fast. So when you have a note on the piano, and you have another note, there's a distance between them, and we associate that distance with a number, right? So if you have a note and the next note, we call that a second. That is an interval. So E to F is a second. E to G would be a third, so you count 1, 2, 3. E to B would be 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. Now let's continue here because you'll see how we can use this to read fast. Here is, with the treble clef, E and B, and though that is a second, and you can like immediately see a second no matter where it is on the staff, because they kind of like lump them together. See, they're so close that they have to be placed side by side. But the other intervals aren't like that. See, once I move the interval up, because there's more space in between, they orient them vertically, excuse me. Horizontal is this way. So they orient them vertically. But with a second, doesn't matter where it is either, you're always going to have them kind of sandwiched together. And it's just one note and then the very next note. So just a quick example, say if I have a cluster of notes, is there a second in this cluster of notes? And the answer is absolutely. You can see it right there. So if I'm playing this chord, I can grab those two first notes so easy, and then because I know the rest of the intervals, I know that's a second and then just stacked thirds, which I'll show you in a minute. And so that's just a little example of how you can use that to identify notes and patterns of notes very quickly, which is the enlightenment of reading music, where you read beyond the individual notes and you start looking at them in groups. And by the way, the intervals for the treble clef translate directly to bass clef. Just keep in mind you're going to be using the bass clef lines and spaces rather than the treble clef. But anyway, regardless, if you have a note and you skip a note, remember that was the spaces in lines of the treble clef and bass clef. You start on a note and you skip every other note. Well, that's what we call moving in thirds. And a third, you can immediately tell because one, it'll go from space to space to space, or line to line to line. Or I like to say that it looks like the beginning of a snowman, but the top has kind of fallen off. You know what I mean? It's the bottom part and then the torso. So it looks like a stacked snowman. You know you're messing with thirds. It doesn't matter whether they start on lines or spaces. Like that. See, they start on lines, but it's still going from line to line, spaced the exact same way. If I move the note up one, that is a fourth. 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's just a third with a little more distance between them. It looks kind of strange because they're not evenly spaced, right? One is on a space, the next one's on a line. And if I move it up one, one's on a line, the other's one's on a space. So they don't match with this fourth. Thirds, they do match. So if one's a line, the other's going to be a line. If it's a space, the other's going to be a space. But this one, they're kind of unusual in that they don't match. But we're going to come across more that don't match. Actually, I realized with the second, right, because these are right next to each other, that this one doesn't match. So seconds and fourths don't match. Let's take a look at a fifth. This is a fifth, and you know a fifth right away when you see it because it'll be a line, and then it'll be an empty line, and then another line. It can also start on a space, have an empty space, and then you have another space. So fifths are pretty easy to identify, in my opinion, and they do match, right? If one's on a space, the other's on a space. One's on a line, the other's on a line. And there's a pattern that's starting to emerge here. Let me know if you start to catch on to what it is. But we're going to continue. What about these? This is a sixth, as you can probably surmise, right? You have F and then D, and you just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and boom, you got the interval there. You can identify a 6 right away because there's some distance in it, right? It almost looks like a fifth. However, what? They don't match, right? Bottom's a space, top is a line. And I said for a fifth, they have to match. Line, line, space, space. So this sixth, an even number, by the way, They don't match, but they're a bit further apart, especially compared to the fourth, which was here. So that was a fourth. A sixth is the same thing, just a little more distance. Now a seventh. I love sevenths too, because you have a space, and then two empty spaces, and then another space. And if it started on a line, you'd have a line, two empty lines, and then the top line, right? Kind of like that. You have the two empty spaces. Now, these do match, right? And this is an odd number, 7, right? And they do match. So if one's a space, the other one's a space. If one's on a line, the other one is on a line. Last interval we'll talk about today, you got E down here and E up here. And I actually told you earlier in this lesson what this is called. I don't even know if I'm going to tell you what it's called right now, because I kind of want you to know what it's called. And if you missed it, I'd rather have you go back and, kind of go back in the lesson. I think I was mentioning it when I was talking about the ledger line rules, and how like there's a pattern and then you move up the pattern to the next one. It's called something. But this is an 8. There's also another name for it. I won't tell you what it is. And keep notice that they don't match. So there's a pattern going on here, right? All even number intervals. Here's what it is. All even number intervals. 2, 4, 6, or 8. You can go past 8, but we're only going to go up to 8 today. 2, 4, 6, or 8. They don't match, right? If one's on a line, the other's on a space. If one's on a space, the other's on a line. So all even numbers don't match. All odd numbers do match. So here's 3. There's 5. There's 7. And if we did 9, it would be here. So anytime they match, line to line, space to space, you got an odd number interval. And anytime they don't match, you have an even number interval. So just keep in mind, it might be the opposite of what you think, right? Sometimes when we think like when things are evenly, or when they match, they might be even, but that's not the case. If they don't match, they're even. And if they match, they are odd. Quick, all you have to tell me is whether this interval is even or odd. And I can tell you right now, I don't even need to know what that ledger line node is up there. I can tell you right now that this is an odd number interval, because we have one on a space here and we have one on a space up there. So this is an odd number interval because you have a space down here and a space up here, and specifically it's a 7th. Okay, I'm going to give you a little quiz. I'm going to do bass clef ones now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an interval. We'll do 3 of them, and you're going to have to tell me what the interval is, and I would actually like you to find the notes on the keyboard as well. It's going to be a little tricky if you're brand new to this, but we'll walk in slowly. So here we go. Okay, remember we're in bass clef, right? So the notes from there down. What number interval is this? Hopefully you said 3, right? Because they match. You're going from space to space, and they're right on top of one another. So you know right away that's 3. So what I would do is you find the bottom note, and you're like, oh, that's the bottom note in the bass clef. And if you practiced everything I've told you up until now, you'll know that that A is right there. So the note above it, it's just the next space in the bass clef. That's going to be C. So you go A, C. So there's the first question. Next, I want you to figure out this one. They match, right? Line to line. So this must be a 3rd. Well, not quite. I would say it's a 5th, because remember, you have a line, you have an empty line in the middle, and then you have the top line. And specifically, what I would do this time is I'd find that top note, because I can see middle C from a mile away. I've been doing it this long. And then it's just 5 notes down from middle C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just like that. Okay, I give you a trick one, because the bottom note I've actually never taught you before, but you can figure this out, okay? They're real close together. So what do you think that is? They don't match either. Just take a second. Pause if you need. That is a 2nd, right? And we know that those notes on the piano are right next to each other. So what I would do is I'd find the note you do know, which is the bottom line G, right? And that's the top in the grouping of the second, right? So the bottom note is going to be lower than it, is what I'm trying to say. So that note you know, the bottom one you don't. So here's G, and guess what? You just go a second down below G, and that sounds beautiful, doesn't it? Well, that's the second. So you can also use intervals to figure out some of the ledger line notes, or the lines below the staff, just by using your intervals. Remember what I said a minute ago, how enlightenment, it was a silly saying, but enlightenment when it comes to reading music is going from reading individual notes to reading them in groups. Now, it may be a little over your head for some beginners here, so I'm going to make this as basic as I possibly can, okay? So beyond intervals, there's other groups you want to be watching out for. The first one is a scale. And all a scale is, if you've ever played a scale on the piano, it's where you play from one note up to the next, that same note with all the scale notes in between. And we'll cover this more in detail in a scale lesson. But for instance, the C major scale goes from C up to the next C, and sometimes back down. You can come back down, and all the notes in between. So on the sheet music, now this is a slightly different scale, but you'll be able to identify a scale right away because it's going to be a string of notes all in a row like that. There aren't any jumps or skips. These are all seconds apart from one another. So it's just one note and then the very next note. And that happens to be a D minor scale. And if you knew your D minor scale, which is why we practice our scales, it makes playing sections of the piece a lot easier because you know what notes to play, and so on and so forth. So learn to identify scales. I actually recommend picking up a scale book like this one. This one's called The Complete Book of Chords, Scales, Chords, Arpeggios, and Cadences. And I'll try to remember to include a link in the description so that you can find that book nice and easy. So this is another piece, and this is another type of pattern you want to become aware of, which are chords. Chords are basically intervals that are stacked on top of one another and played at the same time. And in fact, measure one here, I can identify a chord right away. And if I plot my pinky on that top space of the bass clef, which we all know is all cows eat grass, right? I can know that these are spaced a third apart, and you play them all at the same time. So a chord is going to look pretty easily identifiable. Sometimes they do mess with it where they mix up the chords between the left and right hand, but don't worry about that for now. Just be able to identify what that is. That's a complete snowman right there. Remember when I said the fifth was, or the third, I think, was the bottom and middle of the snowman? Well, this has a bottom, middle, and top. And of course, we'll talk a lot more about chords in the future in this new course for beginners we have. Okay, we've covered the basics. We've covered some more advanced strategies like reading intervals and being able to identify chords and scales. And, well, as promised in the beginning of the lesson, now it's time for me to show you how to practice this so that you can truly master it once and for all. Okay, I want you to go to musictheory.net, and I want you to go to note identification at the top. Well, first you'll have to click on, you want to go to musictheory.net, click on exercises, and then note identification. Now, very important, I want you to click this gear up here, and I want you to first, I would honestly just start out with the treble clef, especially if you're brand new, right? Just start out with the treble clef. And I want you to do 10 questions in this little practice thing in the treble clef. And see how there's a range here? Now, this includes all the ledger line notes. But what I want you to do is to just start out just with notes on the staff by adjusting this little thing here, right? I'm just showing you the bottom note you'll see is on the bottom. Top note is on the top. It doesn't go any further than that. For the key signatures part, just make sure that it's set on the top one here for the natural. And make sure all the settings are as follows. Now we're ready. Notice it changed the treble clef, and we have a note here. So what I want you to do is I want you to do this exercise, and I want you to do two things. The first thing is figure out what letter note this is. It's the middle line of the treble clef, the third line up. And remember, the saying is E for every, G for good, B for boys. And you know the E's right here, G, and there's the B. So find it on the piano. It's not going to make you do that with here. You just have to click on the right note. So you click B, and it'll glow green if you got it right. And then this next one, what is this next one? E for every, G for good, B for boys, D for deserves, and F for fruit at the top. And we know that's an F, but that's not good enough. I want you to find it on the piano. So remember, lines of the treble clef start here, E, G, B, D, and that F is right there. And like I said, you want to do about 10 trebles. So let's say F here. And let's pretend like, I accidentally double clicked it. But anyway, you do 10 trebles. So I want you to do 10 trebles and then change this to bass. And then I want you to do 10 bass and unselect the treble unless you really feel confident you can go back and forth between them really fast. But do 10 treble, 10 bass, and then maybe do 5 that are both together. Or you can click on grand staff and maybe do 5 there. Let's see what it does. Now, I like to adjust the range. There it is. To only the staff for now. We'll work on ledger lines in a minute. So there you go. And then, so 10 treble, 10 bass, and then I want you to see if you can do 5 in the grand staff, meaning that you're going to be switching between treble clef and bass clef pretty quickly. This one's bass clef, top space. We know the spaces are all cows eat. G for grass. You want to find it on the piano, and then you want to click G right there. Oh, this one, treble clef, F, A, C, and that C is right there. And if it takes you more time than me to figure this out, that's totally normal. Take your time. So 10 treble, 10 bass, 5 grand staff. And I would do that for each time that you practice until you feel like you really start to have it mastered. It may take a couple of days. It may take a couple of months. But either way, it's totally fine. And if it takes you a couple of months, I just want to let you know that's totally normal. Some students, it just takes a little bit longer. But then some topics that come up later, they tend to get a little bit easier. So if you struggle with 1 or 2 topics when learning this stuff, just know that it's normal. There's always 1 or 2 topics that people struggle to understand. Okay, we're going back to musictheory.net, the main page, because there's a second part to this practice exercise. And it's very important that you do this, by the way. So I would just work on the notes on the staff first. And then I would start doing intervals. Interval identification. Here we go. Same thing. You just click on exercises, interval identification. What is this? You should know right away. That's a second, right? And I would even play them on the piano also. There they are. And you click second. Boom. There. Oh, what is this one? I'm going to give you a little more time to figure this out. But I will walk you through it. So for instance, these are both spaces, right? They match. So we're probably dealing with some sort of odd number interval. And they're a bit too far away. Remember, the third would be like a stacked snowman. The fifth would have 1 empty liner space. And this actually has 2 empty spaces in between. So this is an odd number interval, and it's a 7th. Boom. What's this one? You should know this one. This is a third. And again, you should find them on the piano, which I hadn't done for the last couple. And I would do about 10 of these a day. I know it can seem like, it's a lot of extra work. I just want to get into playing my pieces. But trust me on this one. Trust me, I have a lot of experience with this. The more time you spend actually mastering reading music and mastering it quick, right, with the ledger lines, the intervals, all that stuff, you will be able to learn pieces. I know it sounds silly, like it's clickbait, but it's not. You'll be able to learn pieces 10 times faster than if you're like, oh, I just want to learn more pieces and I'm not going to practice this stuff. No, you really, really need to know this stuff like the back of your hand. Okay, I have a final quiz for you, and then I'm going to give you one final tip to kind of send you off into learning past this lesson. Here we go. So here's the quiz. What are the lines and spaces for the treble clef? We talked about that pretty towards the beginning. I'm not going to give you the answers to these, by the way. You have to figure this out. Lines and spaces of the treble clef. Question 2, what are the lines and spaces of the bass clef? And question 3, this is a ledger line question. The spaces of a staff, so E, G, B, D, F, is equal to the spaces going up off the staff, starting from where? So you'll have to go back and figure that one out. Again, they're not super difficult questions, but they are like they do encapsulate the broad thing we're trying to get across today. So as promised, I was going to give you a bonus tip here at the end, and here's what it is. So this lesson is part of a new series that I'm making for beginners, basically aimed to give them all of the basic rudimentary things they need to master in order to learn piano effectively. And guess what? You're going to want to watch the rest of that series right here. We're also going to have a live stream follow-up to this lesson. So if you have any questions about what we talked about today, and if you can make it live, I'd love to see you attend. Either way, thanks for coming by today. It's been your piano teacher, Tim, here, and I'll see you next time.